All right, these are Notes 1.1, Introduction to the Environment for Environmental Science. Please go ahead and write your name up here at the top and the period number as well, a period letter. We have a couple terms to go through here. This is basically going to be just an introduction to how people think about the environment and how we study the environment as well. But first, in order to do that, we need to define what the environment is. So the environment is defined as all living and non-living things that organisms interact with. All right, all living and non-living things that organisms interact with. So the environment is not just the living things or the animals or the plants or the trees. It's also the non-living things that are there, okay? So we use two different words to describe these living and non-living things. We use biotic and abiotic. Now, bio means life, and so biotic is referring to the living things. So can you think of some examples of some living things? Okay, if we were to look at this picture of this sheep, what are some things you could think of that are the biotic factors in this picture? Well, we've got the sheep, we have the trees in the background, we have the grass beneath. Okay. There's other factors that could also be biotic factors. So, for instance, wool production is kind of a biotic thing because it's being produced by biotic organisms. Okay. Or even the amount of wood being produced by the trees. That would be a biotic thing you'd be measuring, especially when you're thinking about the amount of wood made by photosynthesis. Okay, well, all wood is made by photosynthesis, but yeah, this is a specific term or a specific measurement that environmental scientists use. Okay, so those are all examples of biotic factors in an ecosystem. Abiotic is referring to the non-living things. And there's a lot of these. Go ahead and just jot down a couple of non-living things that you can think of. Maybe this picture will help spur on some ideas, but what are just some non-living things that you could find in the environment? All right, there's snow on the ground right here. And so thinking about snowfall, or if it's not frozen, rainfall, that is a abiotic factor. Okay, it's cold, and so temperature is another abiotic factor. Go ahead and write down temperature. Maybe you want to know what the humidity is. Okay, or the amount of sunlight that this area receives in the summer or in the winter. Okay, you could consider just anything like rivers, okay, that are running through Condon, or pH of the soil, or pollution. You could think of radioactivity, okay? All these different things are just non-living factors of an environment, and they're all important to consider because those are all things that are going to affect the living things inside of the environment, okay? So, yeah, sunlight, rivers, sheep, all of those are part of the environment. Now, the term environmental science is the study of how the environment affects us and how we affect the environment. So this is science, so it deals mostly with data and facts, and it's not really dealing with opinions, okay? And ideally, that means that it's going to be without bias, okay? So if I'm measuring the pH of the water in the river to be 7, well, that's just a piece of data. That's just fact. There's no bias or opinion embedded in that, okay? So what do you think fits this definition then? Okay, social movement and attitude that seeks to protect or improve the earth. It is subjective and it does have bias. Okay, it's not environmental science. This is what we refer to as environmentalism. So an environmental scientist and an environmentalist are different. Usually an environmentalist is somebody who is maybe they're actively and consciously making life decisions to improve the earth. And usually their decisions are based and rooted in science. For instance, they might know that plastic doesn't degrade very well, and that's a scientific fact. And so therefore they use less plastic and they think plastic is evil. That would be an environmental attitude. All right, so those are the differences between these terms: environment, environmental science, and environmentalism. Okay, so what you see here at the bottom of your notes is this wheel here. And basically, I designed this wheel to help us visualize different attitudes about the environment and how people relate to the earth. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people in many different areas of life, whether that's in church or on an airplane or on social media. And over the years, I've kind of just grouped their ideologies and the stance and position that they come from into different categories. And so I finally just mapped out what I thought they were, the position that they were coming from, okay? And so I'm going to kind of map this out for you to show just how different people think when they think about themselves and how they relate to the environment and to environmentalism. Okay, and I'm gonna start over here in this corner. So you'll notice here at the center is I have 3 different attitudes, okay? There's the human-centered attitude, the earth-centered attitude, and the God-centered attitude. And it kind of radiates out. So this is how people think. This is who people think we are. This is how we act. And then this is what we want as the end result. And this is just kind of how we think in terms of life, right? You have your brain, your person, your hands, your heart. This is what you want in your heart. This is what you're doing with your hands. This is who you feel that you are as a whole person, and this is how you're thinking with your brain. Okay, and these are just some different mentalities. We'll explore different scenarios in which, in quotes and movies and stuff, where you'll see these different attitudes at play. In the first one, when we look at who I am, is that some people kind of feel that they are a tyrant. Okay, a tyrant. And maybe they wouldn't put it that way, but that's certainly kind of how they act. All right. And so when they think who I am, I'm a tyrant, what do they do? Okay, basically they do what they want. Do what I want. So really, you don't care. This is the kind of person who really doesn't care necessarily that much what happens to the environment. They want to do what they want. They have their own agenda. And usually that's motivated by money and profit. Okay, so that's what they want. They do what they want because they feel that they're a tyrant. And this is a very human-centered mentality. Okay, it's kind of selfish. It's just centered on humans, human progress, and society, and yeah, kind of this domination mentality that people have when they think about the environment. The environment doesn't come first. What you want and your money comes first. All right. So that's one mentality that some people have. Let's look at the other human-centered mentality. This one's kind of a surprising one, but I would put it here under the human-centered mentality, and you can kind of rotate your wheel to fit this in here. But this is the people who see themselves as a savior, okay? Typically, this is when you see people saying, we're going to save the earth, okay? And this is a totally different mentality than this one. However, they're both kind of human centered, because look at the end result that they want here. Okay, I want a good future for the next generations. Okay, notice how next generations of what? Well, the next generation of people. So this is still centered on humanity. It's still centered on people. It's on what people want for their future people. Okay, and this has the complete opposite conclusion, though, of what people who kind of view themselves as tyrants view themselves as. People who see themselves as a savior will say that we do need to take care of the earth or save the earth. Take care of earth. All right. So we've got two human-centered mentalities for how we deal with the environment. Let's go to these God-centered mentalities down here, okay? How do we think about the environment in a God-centered way? Well, there's two types of people that I typically see who take different approaches to this, okay? So some people kind of view themselves as powerless. They kind of view themselves as powerless. And basically, here's what they end up kind of wanting, or what they kind of feel, is that they want to feel like they cannot mess up God's world. So they're basically saying, God has created this world. He's in complete control to the point that I can't mess it up. And so there's nothing I'm going to do that's really going to harm the climate or harm creation. And so therefore, I can do what I want. Notice how this is the same conclusion that the person who kind of views themselves as a tyrant concluded. Okay, they can do what they want. They're more motivated by money and profit. Okay, this person, they kind of couch it in this God language here, where they say, like, God's in control, therefore, I can do what I want, I can drive what I want, I can pollute how I want, because it's really not going to mess up God's plan. Okay, and there are a lot of people who think this way. I encounter it a lot in different groups of Christians, and so we'll talk about that some more and where we see that. All right, other people in a God-centered way will view themselves as a steward. Okay, and a steward just means a caretaker. Okay, so a steward is just someone who's taking care of something, and so they are going to conclude that they need to take care of the earth. All right, and what this kind of flows out of is basically, I want to partner with God's rulership. Okay, so God is ruling over the earth and he is in control, but he's placed us as kind of in partnership with him, and so we're taking care of the earth just like he takes care of the earth. We're not meant to trash it. Okay, notice how you have both of these mentalities, and I've seen Christians have this mentality and this mentality. It's very interesting to see how both kind of justify it theologically somehow, or they try to. All right, so that's a God-centered mentality for how people, it's view the earth. Okay, I'm not saying which of these is right, but I am saying that at least they, you know, some of these people here are at least thinking that they're God-centered in their mentality. All right, so earth-centered. Okay, so there's another way that people interact with the environment, or different types of environmentalism that are more earth-centered. And so on this, remember this wheel right here is kind of representing who I am, or who we think we are. All right, so here, this is this wheel is more when people think of themselves as an animal. Okay, so in other words, we're not special, we're not above the other animals, and we are simply to be part of the earth. To be part of the earth. And their reasoning for this is basically, I want to be part of a functioning ecosystem. So, you know, typically these people will say take care of the earth, but they might not say that we have a responsibility to take care of the earth, because having a responsibility makes it sound like humans are special in some way, that we have some sort of responsibility and no other animals do. They would say simply take care of the earth because we're part of the earth, and if we don't, it'll come back to bite us, and we just need to be part of the ecosystem just like any other animal is. Okay, so they wouldn't really say that humans have a special responsibility or a special place in creation, but we still should basically be nice to the earth. All right, so that's the animal kind of mentality. Okay, and the last one, these ones are kind of extreme, the ones near the top up here. Okay, this one is another earth-centered mentality, and basically this is one, remember this wheel here is representing who we think people are. This one would represent the parasite, people who think of themselves as a parasite. And basically the way their conclusion would be to leave Earth. Okay, basically I want Earth to be beautiful without me. They see Earth as being so inherently beautiful that we need to leave it, let it heal without us. Whether that is through humans going off into space and starting life elsewhere, or just drifting off into extinction and not continuing on as a human race. That might sound kind of extreme, but most movies actually kind of, if they have environmental undertones, because movies like to deal with space and stuff, a lot of times this parasite mentality will come through in some of those movies where humans are just really bad for the environment, we're parasites to the earth, and so therefore we need to leave it in order to preserve it. All right, so these are the 6 attitudes that are the main attitudes that people have when they think about how they relate to the earth. Okay, some people think of themselves as a tyrant and they do what they want because they want money and profit. Some people think of themselves as a savior and they're capable of saving the earth, taking care of it, and again, helping humanity strive to be all that it's meant to be and to be in a good relationship with the world. Some people think that they're just powerless to actually affect the earth in any negative way, and so they kind of sense that as a type of humility to say that they can't really damage the earth. And then other people think of themselves as a steward, and this is a God-centered mentality where they want to take care of the earth for biblical reasons. Okay, other people might think of themselves as an animal, and this would not be a God-centered or animal or a biblical worldview, but they would see themselves as we need to do our part in fitting into the ecosystem. And then other people think that we just need to leave because we're damaging the earth so much. Okay, so those are the 6 main mentalities. We'll be exploring these in an activity in person in class, and also you'll near the end of the unit, you'll be writing a paper kind of explaining where you see yourself in along this wheel of attitudes. Where do you feel like you fit in, and how do you view your relationship to the earth? Of course, we will be talking a lot about, we'll do some more notes and more training kind of in this God-centered mentality and what does that look like. So we will talk about this more. All right, so let's go to the back here. All right, so measuring our impact. So you'll notice here I've got kind of a balance beam right here, and in one picture I've got a picture of some trees. So this is a forest here. You can imagine that this is green. Let's go ahead and a green forest. All right, here, sorry, the picture doesn't come very well on this, the way it's printed out here, but these are a bunch of logs here. Okay, so these are a bunch of trees that have fallen down because we've cut them down, but they're found inside of the forest. Okay, so some of the trees are still standing, and then in this picture it's all logs. Okay, so just complete cutting down of all the trees. Okay, so here, this is kind of a spectrum of our relationship to the forest, for instance. Okay, so one mentality might say, do not touch the forest. Okay, and if we go back here, if we go back to our wheel here and we think about the earth-centered mentality, the God-centered mentality, and the human-centered mentality, okay? Which mentality do you think kind of describes this idea of, like, we really shouldn't touch the forest, we really shouldn't cut down trees, we should not deforest? Okay, that'd probably be an extreme earth-centered mentality. Okay, this idea of don't touch the forest, okay, we need to keep it standing, don't cut anything down. All right, whereas over here we see take all the trees. So if we're going to cut down the entire forest, all right, would that be an earth-centered, God-centered, or human-centered? It'd be a pretty human-centered reason to cut down all to cut down all the trees. Particularly, it'd kind of be a tyrant kind of a tyrant mentality right there. Okay, so human-centered, take all the trees. Okay, so here's the problem. If we take all the trees, and let's say we were to go around Condren and we were to cut all the trees that were around Condren, okay, and we made, you know, furniture, and we made some construction materials and timber and built some houses out of the wood. Okay, that's great. So we took all the trees and we benefited from it right now. But the problem is, in 10 years, when we need more trees, we won't have them, okay? And so we're not benefiting from the forest later if we take all the trees now, okay? So go ahead and write down the word later there. We won't benefit from the forest later if we take all the trees now. On the other end of the spectrum here, okay, if we say don't touch the forest, okay, don't cut down any of the trees, well, then we cannot benefit from the forest now. Okay, we won't get any benefit out of the forest. We can't make any furniture. We can't build any houses. We can't construct any timber if we don't cut down any of the trees. Okay, so there needs to be a balance, and that's kind of why in this picture I have a picture of some trees that are fallen and some trees that are still standing here. Okay, and that balance, we use a word for that balance, and we call that sustainability. Okay, so sustainability. All right. If we're going to define sustainability, that's our first blank right here. Okay. Sustainability is the ability to meet current demand without ruining future resources. Okay. The ability to meet current demand without ruining future resources. Okay. So basically what that means is to take some now, but leave some for later. Take some now, but leave some for later. All right. So maybe I don't cut down all the trees, but I also don't cut down none of them. I can cut down maybe a third of the trees. Okay. So I take some for what I need for right now, but I know we're going to need some next year, and we're going to need some in 10 years, and we're going to need some in 50 years. So I'm going to leave some trees there, and I'm also going to make sure that I replace the ones that I cut down. Okay, so that would be a sustainable practice. In German, sustainability is called Nachhaltigkeit, and basically that means after holdingness. Okay, so basically after you take resources, you're still holding something in your hand. Is that the idea of Nachhaltigkeit? Is that I've taken something out of your hand, and yet I'm still holding it in my hand. Okay, I've taken some trees out of the forest, and yet I still have some trees in the forest. That's sustainability. Okay, an example of this around Condern is that whenever they do harvest timber, or they harvest trees and they cut down trees, they leave a lot of snags, which are kind of dead trees that are standing out in the forest, and they leave a lot of dead wood and sticks behind, and branches, because those are going to decompose and produce really good soil to help new trees grow, and it kind of recycles the nutrients back into the soil. So that's something that that is a sustainable practice that they do here around Condern, is they leave some branches in the soil. All right. Now, here are some very important words that we'll be talking about a lot this semester. Okay. So the first word is overshoot. Okay, an overshoot. An overshoot happens when we use more resources than we can replenish later. When we use resources too fast and unsustainably. Okay, it's like spending money with a credit card you know that you can't pay back. Okay, so an overshoot is basically if you're going over budget, or you're taking more resources than you can actually get back later. You can imagine, let's say that there's a daughter and the father gives her $1,000, and he says, you have all year to spend this $1,000 or these 1,000 euros or something, right? Okay, and then let's say that she comes to August and she's already spent all 1,000 euros. Okay, that's a problem, because she was supposed to spend it over the course of the whole year, and then she ended up spending it by August. So by August, she's hit an overshoot. Now, her dad might be gracious and might lend her some more money. Let's say he gives her 500 more euros to help her last out the year. But she knows that next year she's going to have to pay back 1,500 euros back to him. She's already in debt. Okay, this is a hypothetical scenario, but just imagine that she has to pay back the money that the father gives to her or something like that. Okay, so if she has to give back 1,500, you know, she's kind of she's getting a debt that she has to pay back. We do the same thing with Earth. Okay, if we cut down too many trees, then we can, and we don't have enough time to plant trees back, okay, or we're cutting them down too quickly, then we're entering into an overshoot. Okay, every year the Earth has what is called an overshoot day, and every country has its own overshoot day. And sometimes you'll see this in the news or in other things where it'll be like, Germany hit its overshoot day today. Okay, overshoot means that overshoot day is basically a day when we have started using things unsustainably. So I think for Earth, that is in July, when basically we've started using all of our resources for the year. We've stopped using them sustainably to the point that we don't have time to replenish them, or in the future it's going to come back to bite us. We're using things really unsustainably and in a way that is too quick, basically. Okay, so overshoot is really bad. It's not good. An overshoot is calculated by our ecological footprint. Okay, ecological footprint. All right, so a footprint, if you step in the sand, then you've left an impact in the sand, and that is clearly visible there. There's now an empty space where before there was sand, okay? Ecological footprint is basically describing an impact that you have on resources where there's empty space where there used to be resources, okay? So basically, it's basically what we take, the resources that we take. The technical definition is a person or community's impact on the environment, or the amount of land needed to sustain our resources in a renewable way. Okay, so if I need, if my ecological footprint is so many square meters of land, okay, that means that it's that amount of land that it took to raise all the food that I ate, and to grow all the plants that sucked in all the carbon dioxide that I emitted from my car. Okay, that kind of thing. It's basically the amount of land that I used up with my lifestyle of eating, buying clothes that have cotton that came from a field, how many cotton plants did it take to provide the amount of cotton for my one shirt? That kind of thing. That's an ecological footprint. It's an impact I'm having on the world. And the opposite of that, and notice I did put this in red on purpose because you're kind of thinking red impact, okay? This one I'm going to put in green, biocapacity. Biocapacity, okay? That's a C and an I right there, okay? So a biocapacity is what is available. Biocapacity is what is available, or the ability of an environment to produce what people demand. So, for instance, maybe my ecological footprint for the shirt that I'm wearing is, half of a square meter of cotton, okay? But the biocapacity for what is available for me might be 3 square meters of cotton. You'd have to calculate all of the biocapacity, though, by making sure there's enough available for every person. If you're thinking about the biocapacity of a country, it's what's available for every person in the country. Or if you're thinking about global biocapacity, it's do we have enough cotton available for everyone in the world, for instance. Okay. So biocapacity is using, basically, these are taking resources and available resources. And there's different types of resources that we take, okay? So for instance, we have renewable resources. Renewable resources. These are resources that are replenished or renewed in a short time for us to use again. Okay. An example of a renewable resource would be solar energy. Okay. You're never going to run out of sunlight. It's always going to be replenished for us. The sun is making more sunlight every minute. So we're good on that. I'm going to go ahead and pause and give you 30 seconds. I want you to discuss with your neighbors and write down a couple renewable resources that you can think of. What are resources that are replenished or that don't really run out? All right, here's some different ones that you could have written down. Some examples of renewable resources would be fruit trees. Okay, wood. You're always going to have trees growing. Okay, maybe grain. Wind. So you're always going to have wind blowing that's caused by the sun, and the sun is producing different temperatures of air, and that causes air pockets to kind of move around. Okay. We can always get water up to the hill and go down the hill or through a river, and that can cause a water mill to run. Okay. So wind, water, grain, crops, solar energy, those are all renewable resources, and we measure our biocapacity and ecological footprint of those resources. All right. So what's the opposite of that? The opposite is non-renewable resources. So these are resources that are not replenished in time for us to use. Can you think of some? Coal. Okay, coal is a type of fossil fuel. Okay. And basically a fossil fuel are dead plants that have dead ancient plants that have decayed underground and formed these chemical compounds that we can use for energy. Okay, so that also comes in the form of oil and in natural gas. Okay, petrol for your car, all those things. You know, part of why people want to get more solar energy and other types of energy is because we don't actually know how much petrol or how much gasoline there is out in the world for us to drill for our cars, for instance. So there's probably a lot for now, but in 100 years, will there actually be any left? It's not being constantly made. What is in the earth is in the earth, okay? So another one would be things like lithium or other minerals. Those are all examples of rare earth minerals, that kind of thing, or things that are not going to be renewed. They're not like fruit. They don't just grow on trees. Okay, we have them and they aren't, or even if they're very slow at developing, that kind of thing, if they aren't quick enough to be renewed in time for us to use, then it's a non-renewable resource. Okay, so those are two different types of resources. Now, we want to measure these resources so that we can talk about our biocapacity and ecological footprint. So how do we measure the resources that we have and that we don't have? Roll down my roulette in here. All right. how do we measure how many resources we take and how many we have? So we use a measurement called a hectare. A hectare, Hectare. Okay. A hectare is 10,000 square meters. Okay, or it's 100 meters by 100 meters. So it's just an area of land, kind of like an acre is an area of land here. Okay, so here, this is a box drawn around BFA's campus. So right now you should be sitting right there. And here's the Jan's building, here's chapel, here's the gym, okay? And this box is actually 100 meters by 100 meters. And so that comes out to be 10,000 square meters. Okay, 100 times 100 is 10,000. This is 1 hectare. And let's go ahead and label that. 1 hectare is about the size of BFA's campus. So this is the amount of land that I would use to measure resources. So I could have a hectare of cherry trees, okay? But if I measure a hectare of cherry trees, it's not just a hectare. There's actually a special word for it. And that special word is a global hectare, okay? Which we abbreviate as GHA, and you need to know that. Okay, global hectare is a GHA. Okay, a global hectare is a hectare of productive land. So it's the official unit for measuring biocapacity or footprint. So for instance here, this isn't really that productive. Okay, maybe there's a bit of production here because I got some trees and stuff. But this is a hectare, but a global hectare would be something like, you know, maybe I've got a bunch of trees and I've got a forest and I grow all of these trees so that I can harvest them for paper, okay? That would be a global hectare, okay? Maybe I'm out in the open ocean. Maybe. Man, I made it all the way to the end and then my camera dropped. All right, maybe I'm out in the open ocean. Not open ocean. Maybe I'm along the coast and I have 100 meters by 100 meters of fishing grounds. Okay, so I've got all these little fish. Okay. Well, fish are a resource. In fact, we could add that up here to renewable resource. Ooh, let's do that, fish. Okay. So, fish are a renewable resource, so that would be a global hectare. Let's say that I just had 100 meters by 100 meters of just water. Okay, but there's no fish, or there's nothing to harvest. Okay, that we would just simply call a hectare. Okay, it's not a global hectare, it's just a boring hectare. There's no productivity inside of it. Okay, if I had a hectare of just sand, that would just be a hectare. If I had, though, like a hectare of area where I were mining out minerals, that could be a global hectare because it's productive, okay? Or it's something that maybe that wouldn't be so productive because they're not very renewable. I probably ought to say productive is more of a renewable thing. So yeah, just anything that has things that we're growing or we're harvesting, that's a global hectare. And a hectare is the base measurement that can do anything. It can measure anything, any 100 meters by 100 meters. Okay, so we'll look at this a bit more a bit later, but we measure ecological footprint and biocapacity in terms of a hectare. So I might say my footprint is 2 global hectares or something like that, which means that I really used up enough resources to where I had 100 meters by 100 meters, and I had 2 of those. You don't have to draw this, but if I said my ecological footprint were 2 global hectares, then I'd have 2 of those. And maybe, you know, in one corner I have, here's a tree that will provide all of the paper that I use for that year. And then here's a tree that sucks up all the CO2 that I emit with my car. And then here's a pond that has all the salmon in it that I eat because I love salmon. And then here's a pond that has all the tuna in it because I love to eat tuna. And then here's, you know, here's a couple corn stalks for all the corn that I eat in a year. Okay, so basically, yeah, when I say that I have an ecological footprint of 2 hectares, I'm saying that I have that much of land that I'm allowed to live off of, or that I have used up for that year. Okay, and so we measure these in hectares. Different countries have different ecological footprints, as you might imagine. America has a very high ecological footprint. On average, the people, Americans, use a lot of these hectares of resources, which is interesting. Over break, when I was visiting with different people in America, they kind of phrased it just as a, like, we're so blessed to have so many resources that we can waste, was the way that they were putting it. It was kind of interesting. Whereas other countries can live off of less land and they're not so wasteful, that kind of thing. Typically, the more developed a country is, the more wasteful they tend to be. And so you see some of those trends. All right, so those are some of the terms that you've learned today. All right, you've learned just an introduction to the environment, environmental science, and environmentalism. We've looked at different motivations and attitudes that people have when they think about how they relate to the environment. Some people think of themselves as horrible and they're impacting the earth in a horrible way. Other people think that they're just part of the earth, that we should take care of the earth, that we can save the earth, or that we should dominate the earth. Okay, and regardless, we need to, think about how we can sustainably take care of the earth and live in it without exhausting our resources. And so these are all terms that help us understand how we don't overexhaust our resources. All right, that is the notes. Thank you.